This podcast is part of the Batman Universe Podcast Network, hosted by the BatmanUniverse.net. Check out everything related to Batman and the entire Bat family at the BatmanUniverse.net, including news and original content related to comics, movies, television, merchandise, video games, and more. Also, check out some of the other unique podcasts that TBU has to offer. Consider supporting this podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Even $1 can go a long way in supporting this content that you enjoy. Look for a link over at the BatmanUniverse.net to offer your support now. And now, on with the show.
In 2008, a podcast was created with one goal: to bring Bat fans around the world news related to movies, comics, video games, television, merchandise, and so much more. And now, the Batman Universe Podcast has returned.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the TBU Podcast. I'm Dustin. BJ and Scott are both with me today, and today we are talking all about the special features found on the Batman home video release. Just when you thought we might be done talking about the Batman, well, that's certainly never going to be the case, because there's always something to talk about. And if you have been following along with news in general, you know that the home video release just happened last week. And when it did happen, there was a couple of things. One, if you buy a digital copy, generally there is the availability to watch the special features. Sometimes there's limitations on what you can see and what you can't see when it comes to the special features. But if you buy the actual Blu-ray version, which conveniently we have a link in the description if you are so inclined to purchase it, but there is a number of special features. The actual disc itself says over 2 hours of special features on the Blu-ray, and it lists off some of the specific ones. We're going to talk all about all of the different special features that were actually included on the release. There's some that we've already discussed, like the Joker deleted scene, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that gives us more insight as to the mind of Matt Reeves when he was creating it, and a lot of how things came to be, how the Batmobile became what it was, how the wingsuit sequence existed the way it did, and where the thought process behind that was. And there's a lot of insight from a lot of the crew and some of the cast that were involved in the project. Now, I will say, as a upfront forewarning, I have not seen. I used to watch special features like religiously when films came out, probably a decade ago when I had a lot more time on my hands, and I used to watch all kinds of special features for every, not just like, a Batman movie because I'm a huge Bat fan, but also a variety of other action movies that I really enjoyed and things like that. And over the years, you get married, you have kids, and you just don't actually find the time to be able to watch hours of special features on top of the hours of movie that you actually have to watch. So it was kind of a treat to go back and watch special features for a movie that I really enjoyed. And I'm thinking maybe in the future we might dive into some of the other special features for some of the other films over the years, because every film that has released, even as far back as like 1989 Batman, there are special features attached to the home video releases. Some have more than others. Obviously, more recent ones have more content, but there's a lot of content in general. So we're going to dive into all of this. Scott's going to take the lead on here because he did a great job of taking a bunch of notes and talking points and things like that. And then BJ and myself will chime in with the various comments related to the individual special feature segments that were part of it. So Scott, take it away.
Yeah. So, I guess the way I have this organized, we'll go through the features, as they're ordered on the discs. And there's 11 sections. And the last section is the deleted scenes, but the first one is called Looking for Vengeance. And that's, pretty much about, Bruce, or Batman and what they were thinking in terms of like how this character would act and feel and, what was going on there with Batman, and the main takeaway I took away from this section was, they talk about a little bit his relationship with Alfred and how, you know, Bruce's fighting style is partially born from Alfred, who trained him, but it's also something that, as Matt Reeves used, the words he used were cobbled together, to be emblematic of a guy who's, out looking for vengeance, which is kind of how it ties into the title of the section, and that there is no one clear style, but more so this kind of, style that encompasses rage, and anger and, trying to avenge his parents.
One of the things that I took away from this segment was there was a sequence that they originally had planned for the film where they were going to focus more on the fighting between Alfred and Bruce and the training that they go through. And Matt Reeves specifically said that they had a plan for when Bruce came back from being out all night. They were going to show him sparring with Alfred on a regular basis to show that that's how he trained and that's how he kept up with, his moves, sets, and things like that. And they ended up cutting it, which it makes sense in the larger scheme of things because there was like this kind of fracture between Alfred and Bruce in the film that kind of gets mended after the accident in Wayne Tower. And that was kind of interesting because while it's hinted at that obviously when Alfred's in the hospital bed and he's talking to Bruce, he says, I was able to teach you how to fight, but that wasn't what you needed. You needed a father. And, that's not what I was. And that it's interesting because you don't see a lot of, there's plenty of versions to compare Alfred to the comics, but when you look at the other incarnations of Alfred when it comes to the films, there's very, very different versions. Michael Caine, as amazing as an actor as he is, and as amazing as his portrayal of Alfred in the Dark Knight trilogy is, he was more of that father figure. He was much, much less of a, I'm here to help you train to, get you to be where you want to be kind of situation. He was that father figure. That's who he was. That's why we saw him crying, when he thought that Bruce was dead and all of that. Like that was the version of Alfred that we saw there. And this is going to come up a bunch of different times during a lot of these special features, but it's amazing how many different incarnations of some specific version of a character or the Batmobile or the bat suit or the gadgets. It's amazing how many different versions we've seen of some of these things. Michael Gough, who played Alfred in the first 4 Batman films, he was just kind of there. He was there as like, in some ways, to lighten the mood when Batman was on screen and he was in the Batcave and things like that, because everything was serious with Batman. So you need something to lighten that up. And then in later films, his role was kind of reduced and you had more of Robin and then Batgirl kind of filling that gap for Alfred later on. But when it comes to the different versions of Alfred, it's unique to see how very different that can be, and then that obviously that translates to the other things as well.
For sure, a couple things I took from that on the Blu-ray was like you said, his fighting styles cobbled together from different things, and like this Batman like isn't as like untouchable as like the Ben Affleck version was. This Batman was taking some damage. He's not all knees and elbows like the Christian Bale one was, or even like Michael Keaton was just kind of running up and punching people. He wasn't like a technician or anything. And this one, like Bruce was taking a lot of damage. And even Pattinson said how he tries to recreate the night like his parents were murdered. Like every night he goes out, like in his mind, like when he's punching down a criminal, like he's imagining that it's whoever killed his parents. If it's Joe Chill in this version, whoever it was, he's kind of just driven by that rage all the time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and it's kind of interesting too because it flows into the next section, which is the Batman, Genesis section, where they talk about Robert Pattinson in the role a little bit more, but also big chunk of that too was in how Matt Reeves wanted to find something to connect with, and obviously where this film was born out of, he wanted something that was obviously a franchise film, but something born out of like his love of the character and comics, and something personal and deep for him. and I had a couple things I queued in on this point, but the thing I really took, I think the biggest takeaway I had in this section was, there's a point where like Matt Reeves is talking about how he went back to the comics and he started with 1939, the Chemical Syndicate, and went through, and he had a little notebook of things that he connected with, personally with the character when he was trying to figure out what story and what, film he wanted to tell. And, in doing that, in journaling, while he was going through trying to figure out this movie, it gave him the idea to also, create Batman's journal and add that as an element to the character. So you have this detective who's, so invested and so into it that he's also has his little, notebook that he writes in like every night.
I feel like a lot of throughout the special features, like this movie like spawned maybe a lot of comic book fans like Jeffrey Wright. He's referencing comics throughout like parts of the special features. Paul Dano references Hush at one point somewhere. Like Matt Reeves is a big comic book fan. I'm sure Pattinson was reading. It feels like a lot of these guys they had comic books all over set.
And that's honestly really great to hear that was the case, because there was a lot of talk about Batman Year One in various different segments that were on the special features. There was a lot of talk about Year One and Frank Miller's version of Catwoman during the Catwoman segment. But every single person who is a major player, whether it be the main actors or whether it be the producers, obviously Matt Reeves, who's a producer, the writer and director, they're all and Dylan Clark, the other producer, they were all talking about comics as if it was something that greatly influenced them.
Yeah, and I like too that like when they're all talking about it, like they're all like pulling these themes or things that they resonated with, and it kind of helped foster this idea that, each character has their own theme. We've talked about this a lot in the Art of the Batman book when we did our review on that. But in the Looking for Justice section, which is the next one, which goes into more of like what you were talking about, BJ, with Paul Dano, a lot of the things he was saying, if Batman is vengeance, what does Riddler represent? And so Paul Dano's, idea in characterization of the Riddler, revolved around the word justice, and in that vein, this section kind of explores how both, Riddler and Batman are guided, by their emotional trauma stemming from childhood, some in a ways that it's kind of shared, but also different and unique, and serves as a plot point or a subplot to the film.
Well, one of the things that I thought was great about this section, specifically talking about Looking for Justice and focusing on the Riddler, was the connection that while it is evident in the film about how Riddler is viewing himself as if he is a vigilante as well, and he was almost inspired by Batman to become what he is, there's a level of like, when it's being explained to you as openly as it is within this segment, and then they're showing you the sequences in the film that kind of like play into what they're trying to do, you see it almost in a new light. Like, obviously, I knew as I was watching the film that Riddler was believing he was doing something good. It's evident in his dialogue. But that sequence where he's talking to Batman in Arkham, it gives a completely different light, because while I was watching, I was getting so set on the idea of him saying Bruce Wayne and him potentially knowing who Batman was underneath the cowl. I was so highly focused on that specific aspect that I completely negated the fact that he truly believed he was just like Bruce Wayne, but he was forgotten while everybody else cared about what happened to Bruce Wayne because Bruce's parents were killed. It didn't matter what happened to him and the other orphans at the orphanage who were promised these great things, because that wasn't going to happen anymore. And there's like this amazing parallel between the two characters that really hasn't been there, at least for their childhood aspects. But then it kind of lends into the idea that he really does believe he's doing good. It just so happens that it's in a very sadistic and creepy way.
That part I bumped into how they're similar. That's like always kind of hear like Joker and Batman are like two sides of the same coin, or even like Two-Face or Ra's al Ghul. You never really hear them compared to the Riddler, and that this movie made that comparison happen. Like that would never happen in Batman Forever or anything like that. So that really bumped in. That I really found awesome. And even like Paul Dano in the special features when they're interviewing him, like he's giving out creepy vibes just sitting there as himself. He's sitting in that little apartment, that Riddler apartment. He's kind of soft spoken. I was like, is he method acting or what's he doing?
I really like that because I thought, like, like you're saying, like he's a little eerie and kind of unsettling, but also like I thought he was kind of like very profound and eloquent in the way he was speaking. I highlighted a quote that when they're on one of the many occasions they're interviewing him, but the thing he, says, he goes, the thing that's so great about Batman historically, culturally, and in this film is that space in between, which is where we really all live. That's so potent, powerful, and true. And he says, I think it's about having heroes and having villains and exploring the space in between. And, my takeaway of that and like what he was speaking to is this idea that like, you have these themes and these characters are based around these themes, but, the world in which they inhabit is all very much kind of like a murky gray, and it's they're both polar opposites, but at the same time, like what we're really getting at is that weird middle ground, that we're kind of trying to figure out and resolve ourselves with.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about that is some of the best villains are ones that you could root for. I mean, to a degree. I mean, you could sit here and say that the Riddler is trying to, clean up corruption. He's doing it in a way that it is not going to make a lot of people happy about it. But at the same time, I think that there is a level of people. I mean, at the end of the film, he's got all these followers who have decided he's done what he's done, and it's just the beginning. So they're going to take over control, and they're going to, enact underneath what his guidance is for the attack at the end of the film at the Madison Square Garden-like place, or Gotham Gardens. But I think that it's interesting because the Riddler a lot of times is portrayed as just this like intelligence counterpart to Batman. It's just, he's all about just proving that he's smarter than Batman, and that's what he's so concerned with. It's not about the fact that he potentially is trying to, get justice, as the segment is called, looking for justice. It's not like he's doing that. There's a couple of small incarnations within comics. Specifically, there was a run with Paul Dini there where he wrote the Riddler, and Riddler was a detective. He was reformed. He was not, bad anymore, and he was being hired as a private detective to solve crimes. And people would come to him and just basically pay him to solve crimes, and he was convinced that this was the best thing he could do. And that version of Riddler was great. I liked that version of Riddler because it was different than just, I need to outsmart Batman constantly. And the thing is, like, in the large scheme of things, that's what this Riddler was. He was a detective in the sense of he found out something. He figured out all these different connections to the corruption that was within Gotham, and he was basically trying to make it better. But he was inspired by Batman to be able to do what he was doing. Was it the right way? That's, I'm not going to say yes, but I'm sure there are some people who could say, yeah, that's arguably the right way to go about doing stuff. And it's very interesting just to see how different this version of the Riddler is compared to past versions of the Riddler.
Yeah, definitely. What did you guys think of the Becoming Catwoman section? I actually took quite a few notes on here, but I wanted to hear what you guys thought first.
I liked it. It was it really delved into how she's not Catwoman yet, but she's slowly getting there. I don't know if it was in that part, but at one point Reeves says how like our four main characters, Batman, Selina, Riddler, and Penguin, were all kind of shaped by their childhood and like their past traumas. And like you can definitely see that with Selina. She wants to get revenge on Falcone. That's her father. She wants what's hers. She had to live poor growing up, and she kind of wants what she feels she deserves, and you can see how that's slowly getting there. And maybe by the next film, I assume she'll be full-fledged Catwoman.
The one thing that I got out of this one more than anything was there was a point in this one where they were talking about how this is kind of the birth of the character. And I think it was this, I think it was in this one. I can't be sure because it kind of all mold together once you watch a bunch of them. But Reeves was saying that, like, he didn't want to do an origin story for Batman. He wanted to do, he wanted to create a story that Batman already existed. But in a lot of ways, superhero films in general kind of have an origin story for the villains in a single film. And he said if this was not a film for the origin of Batman, it was in fact an origin story for Catwoman, because you're starting to see her becoming the Catwoman that we all know. And it merely makes me think that Reeves has every intention of including a lot of these characters in future films and going outside the box of a typical superhero film. And I think we talked about this before when we were talking about the film, but like Catwoman, at the end of the film, it leaves it open for her to return. Obviously, the return of the Riddler is entirely possible. Penguin is definitely obviously going to be coming back. And I think that it's going to be a step outside of the normal versions of superhero films where by the end of the film, the villain's taken down and you don't see the villain ever again. There's occasionally, every once in a while, something where the villain emerges, comes back and is a new threat somehow because they've teamed up with somebody else or something like that. But I truly believe that what Reeves is doing is he's really creating an expansive universe that he can come back to, and he can, if he doesn't want to have Catwoman play as large of a role because Falcone's no longer in the film and things like that, she could still play a role, but she doesn't have to play as big of a role. I think it would be a misstep because I think the chemistry between them, which is another thing in this one, they focused on the chemistry test, which Reeves has talked about a lot, and that was in a lot of interviews going up to or leading up to the film, about Reeves talking about how when Robert Pattinson first met Zoe Kravitz and they kind of worked together, not first met because they were friends outside of this film prior to getting both cast, but they met up, they did a chemistry test, and the chemistry test was like kind of what sealed the deal for both of them to land the roles as Batman and Catwoman respectively. And it was cool to actually see that footage. This isn't the only one that it was shown in, but a lot of her side of the chemistry test was shown in this more so than some of the other ones. So that's the stuff that really stuck out to me in this segment.
Yeah, and actually I just checked my notes. I did note the birth of the Catwoman, thing that Reeves was talking about, and there was a point where he said, in his mind it was on the roof or where the bat signal is when Catwoman pushes Kenzie off the roof. That's the birth of the Catwoman that they believe. I think actually Zoe Kravitz mentioned that in the interview, and the way she worded it was, that's supposed to signify Batman went one way, and she went another way. And that's kind of the spiritual, realization of the character. But in this section, I think the thing I thought was really fascinating was, the idea of Selina's wigs. And Reeves was kind of particular. He wanted the first, wig to look realistic. So, the idea being when Bruce follows her home after seeing her at the Iceberg Lounge, her removal of the wig, informs the audience, subtly that she is a mysterious character because Bruce is surprised, and then we too, on our first viewing would be surprised too that is not her actual hair. It's something much closer to year one, and then throughout the rest of it, she has different wig changes that also, constantly change how she looks and, add to the subterfuge and evasiveness of her character.
I like too how her whip wasn't an actual whip. It was like it was like a motorcycle chain or something like that, or like it was an actual whip. Yeah, I like that aspect of the character.
Yeah, it was cool. The next section was all about the Batmobile, titled "The Batmobile." You got a lot a good look under, what's under the hood, and how it operates, top down. And then, the mention that they built 4 vehicles, for the film: a ram car, a lightweight car for jumping, a car to be used for rigging and filming, and then what they called the hero car, which was electric, that was meant for quiet performances so it can move around without, making any noise.
Yeah, the one thing that was great about this was they really went in depth about how exactly the car was built and how it was formed, and it is a complete custom car. There was a point where he was like, a lot of people always ask about where the engine come from, because that's what everybody always asks about, famous cars, is like, where's the engine come from when you're custom building a car? And he said, this engine is custom to this. This is not an engine that you would ever find in another vehicle. They were talking about how not only did they use parts from, existing parts and things like that, but a lot of the stuff was actually specifically custom built specifically for this vehicle. They were actually metal printing, which I didn't even know was a thing. Basically like 3D printing, but with metal, and they were able to actually create some of the aspects of the engine to make it work for what they wanted to. It was also interesting that they talked about how the front had louvers on it originally, and they planned on using them, and then as production moved on, they realized it really wasn't necessary. So they just had like that glow at the front of the car. That by itself made the car a little bit more menacing to a degree.
As time has gone on, I've really, I think when I first saw the picture of the car, I was like, it's just kind of nothing really special about it. But as reading The Art of the Batman, watching this, that car's kind of grown on me.
Yeah, it is really cool. I'm not a car person, but watching them, kind of break it down and talk about all the tech and engineering that went into making all their cars is really cool. And then the next section was the anatomy of the car chase, which, is pretty interesting to see how that was filmed. A couple of things I noted on: they had over 100 vehicles driving around, a half-mile set, to make the scene, and Reeves really wanted a torrential rain sequence, so as the cars pick up the pace, you'd have hydroplaning, and then, since I really like the kind of nuts and bolts of filmmaking, what they used was something called a rotary, which was like 7 cameras stuck together. So, when they're driving around, they could film everything from all sides.
That was really cool because the technology that they ended up using seemed very similar to something that I remember seeing on some special feature or something, some promotional clip or featurette or something like that for The Mandalorian, where The Mandalorian, they were filming a lot of the exterior stuff out away from the set, and then they would film more in-depth things like some of the desert scenes and things like that with the actors in this like closed set with these giant LED screens. And the LED screens that were projecting the stuff that they were filming with the rotary was the stuff that allows them to be able to do these amazing shots that are close up with the correct lighting of what's happening outside by using these giant screens to project the explosions or the flashes of light from the street lamps and things like that. That was really cool. One of the things that stuck out to me, which you got in your notes as well, is that Penguin's driving a Maserati. I didn't have any idea he was driving a Maserati in the film itself, but even more specifically it was a purple Maserati, which you would never even know because it's just so dark in the film. It's impossible to see the actual color of the paint of the car.
I like watching all these special features on movies because it does kind of blow my mind, like how all this stuff is put together. Like they're doing that little rehearsal one where it's in daylight and there are all these cars whipping around, and you see one clip of there's like a little car like on top of a car that can control the little car. Like that stuff kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really intense, and it's the other flip side of that they had for another sequence they broke down was the wingsuit jump, which, I thought was interesting because, I guess while watching it, it was never anything I really considered how they put that together, but I thought it was interesting that, for them, one of the longest processes, to figure out for this movie was like, first off, how to get the wingsuit to deploy from the bat suit and make it look like good on film, that it was just like it took so much engineering just to get that scene where he like suits up, and then obviously like the rest of the sequence, when he's flying is kind of a, a edit of like movie magic, I guess you would say, with drone footage that they flew around Chicago, which I thought was really cool.
And what was really cool was that they said that the drone footage they filmed LaSalle Street, which happens to be the same street that they used in The Dark Knight for the scene where the semi flips. That was the exact same street that they used for The Dark Knight. And it actually, to a degree, it's not the exact same spot. I mean, it's not just like a little street. It's a long street, so there's plenty of different spots you could go. But that was kind of cool. I thought it was amazing how much detail they went into about trying to figure out how to make it as possible in real life, like as grounded as possible so that it could actually be real. And the fact that, like, I did think it was a really cool sequence in the film where, like, he kind of like pulls this thing and then it turns into like an airbag that goes around him to become the wingsuit. I thought that was kind of cool, but I didn't really think about, I don't know, is this real? I wasn't even imagining it could be real. And at least from the way it's explained in this segment, they tried to make it as real as possible. So while it may have little elements that are suspending reality, there is a lot of time and effort that went into trying to make this seem as if it could be real as possible, even if it isn't.
Just to piggyback on that, like that kind of makes me laugh, like when they're saying how real it is and how grounded it is, but that scene ends with Batman kind of crashing off a bus and rolling about 50 feet and then getting up and walking off. And I'm like, I'll go with it because I like everything else.
Yeah, it just kind of like ends in a joke, which is fun, but it was pretty crazy just how much work went into that. The biggest section on the special features is a little like documentary, I guess you could say, because it's almost an hour long, called Vengeance in the Making, which incorporates a lot of the standalone, bits from the standalone pieces we've already been talking about and ones we are yet to talk about. But also, what was really cool about this was it took you through, the shoot from like conception, all the way through filming month by month. And it starts in January 2020 and it goes through March 2021, and obviously the pandemic hit and they were shut down for 6 months, so you kind of see what I thought was like the biggest takeaway I took from this is it's interesting to see what happens to like a movie production when something like the pandemic hits and how they have to like, they've prepared to do a shoot in a set amount of months and they have everything figured out, but now they have to refigure out how they're going to do things, to socially distance their cast and crew and, complete the movie, but in a way totally different than, how they originally intended to.
And it's amazing because a lot of the earlier stuff that I watched prior to this one was they were talking about the initial casting. It was like middle to late 2019 when they were casting and they were trying to figure out exactly who's going to play Catwoman, who's going to play Batman. And you hear like how they were getting involved. And then there was a point, I think, during the Catwoman one where Zoe Kravitz was talking about how they were training at length for a long period of time, and then things changed because of COVID, and then they had to kind of figure out how to still train and still keep into what they were supposed to be doing, even though they couldn't be on set. And in the Catwoman one, they were talking about how like the stunt coordinators were actually filming video showing moves to practice themselves because they were all being socially distanced. And this was just interesting because there was a lot of stuff that kind of shows that aspect, like you were saying, Scott. Like it's crazy to see how something like this that originally should have took a short amount of time, or to a degree a longer amount of time, but like it should have took a set amount of time and then they got extended for such a longer period of time. Like originally this film was meant to come out almost 9 months earlier than it actually ended up coming out. And while the film, it's obviously was delayed for a total of 6 months because of the filming, at least was delayed for 6 months, it still was ended up being delayed even further because of just other things that had come up. And it's just interesting to see how that all landed out.
I do wish that I really don't see a lot of like documentaries like this on special features. I really feel like that should be on like every special feature. I remember it was on Last Jedi. They had that one. I watched that one, but I'd love to see one for like Avengers or Endgame or any Batman movie. But I like the part when they came back from COVID and Matt Reeves said he wore his mask. And his the crew, like the cast, never saw his full face, and John Turturro kind of called him Batman, like he was their Batman. He was in a mask the whole time. He was like their hero to look up to.
Yeah, I thought that was funny too, and I think there's a lot going on in here, but I think one of the things I really kind of got like nerdy excited at too was as they're going through the characters and talking to the cast about who they're playing and how their feelings about their characters. When they get to Collin Farrell, he mentioned part of the inspiration for how to portray Penguin, like the makeup kind of really helped inform him how he wanted to act. And Matt Reeves also saw Penguin as a character like Scarface, and when I first saw the film, I kind of thought that too. And I thought, in my head, I thought like the original Scarface, not the remake with Al Pacino, but the Howard Hawks one that was based, loosely off of Al Capone. But Collin Farrell mentioned that he checked out the Arkham series for Penguin.
Yes.
That's
I can picture Collin Farrell playing Arkham City all night long.
Yes. But yeah, the next section we had in here was something called Unpacking the Icon, which is I guess I would say is the very tech heavy segment, about like the bat suit and utility belt, Riddler's apartment and his outfit, Riddler's journal, and then also more on Catwoman and Penguin, particularly from like costuming perspectives.
Yeah, there's one thing that stuck out to me was they said that one person wrote out all of Riddler's journals, hand wrote them. That poor person, they deserve the biggest raise because I can't believe someone wrote all that and no one ever saw. Like we never read any of those.
They should release it, give it its own volume, or sell it independently as a book. And then we have the last section before the deleted scenes is called A Transformation of the Penguin. And, I thought it was interesting because both of the guys that helped come up with the design and prosthetics for the Penguin were both named Mike. So on my notes, I have them listed as two Mikes. But I did find it interesting, too, that one of them was mentored by one of the design and makeup people from The Godfather. And in that note, I like that, Matt Reeves had the thought to make Penguin both, as he puts it, his words, pathetic and sympathetic, and he said he was referencing Fredo from The Godfather. So I thought that was really cool. And that kind of characterization, for like this mobster, I really appreciate because it kind of makes him, more rounded in a way that you don't see too often with the Penguin, in any sort of like live action media.
There was two things that stuck out to me in this section. The first one was the absolute effort that went into creating the prosthetics is insane. I mean, I know that there's extensive prosthetics for certain characters within film history that are amazing, but like the fact that they took Collin Farrell and they turned him into somebody that was completely unrecognizable is insane. I remember when they first there was some like leaked spy pics that came from the set, and they were showing these pictures and saying, "Oh, that's Collin Farrell," and I kept looking at it and going, that is not Collin Farrell. I don't know how everybody's getting this mixed up, but he truly was just unrecognizable. The other really cool little thing was that when the prosthetic designers, when they were talking about it, they said that they specifically created the silhouette of his face to mimic a beak, so that way when he was talking, he would have a look like a beak. And I thought that was really cool because it's not something that you're going to immediately pick up on, but it's this like little subtle thing that you can put in. They also said his eyebrows were purposely done to mimic penguins, and I thought that was really kind of cool how they had like these little things that they put in there to kind of connect to that motif of being penguin, but not, be as like, up in your face.
Those, I think one of the names is Mike Marino. I remember to write that down. That guy, he's got to win like an Oscar for makeup design or whatever it is, because that guy's like, Collin Farrell made him look totally different. He did the, I think in the deleted scene commentary, we find out he did the Joker makeup. So that guy definitely, he's like the unsung MVP of the whole movie. And in that part, I liked when once all the makeup was on and someone had like a camera phone on Collin Farrell, he started playing around like as the penguin. He's like, "Are you talking to me? Like, what are you looking at me for?" He's doing his penguin impression, kind of got right into character.
I like that too, because I feel like, as they develop the TV show, whatever they do with like the future of the franchise, all signs point to Collin Farrell being game to like continue this.
Yeah, he's having a blast.
Yeah. You mentioned the Joker deleted scene, and moving on to the deleted scenes, there are two, and they each have commentary. And like the Joker scene, we've talked about in a previous episode, but I did, watch it again, and then I watched the commentary with it, and I found the commentary fascinating, to see kind of an insight on, where their heads were at, and creating this, and like the big note I have is, Batman and the character who would be the Joker, and they wanted to specify that he's not the Joker yet, but eventually, like everybody else, he's still finding himself and figuring himself out, and he's very much like a proto-Joker. The backstory unspoken in here is that they had a connection, Batman and Joker, in Batman's first year, and so they've already met, and they have this relationship, as you can tell by the deleted scenes that hints at that, but as these movies develop and this world develops, this character will eventually become the Joker. And one of the traits he has is, since he kind of has this, disease or deformity, that has marked him from childhood, he's used to people looking at him funny because of his condition. And so, as Reeves kind of explains it, he has an insidious insight into how people think or feel, and that's how he's able to like tinker and break people apart and psychologically torment them. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say is, even if you've already seen the scene and you have no desire to watch it with the commentary, watch the scene over again on the release, because there is some differences in the audio and the lighting of the scene than the version that was released on YouTube. Not anything super major, but you can hear the dialogue a little bit more clearly in this, and I feel like it was just mixed better for this. It was almost as if because they had no intention of ever releasing the other clip maybe on YouTube initially, and it was going to always be made for that, maybe they were rushing to try to get it together to be able to release it as part of like the after marketing once the film released, and which is fine, but the version that releases with the home video, it sounds so much better, and it's worth just a watch for that by itself.
I liked in the commentary when Matt Reeves was saying how deep down Batman thinks what the Riddler is doing is like, he's right in the sense that these guys need justice, but he just doesn't like the way that they go about it, and he kind of won't admit it to himself. Just his conversation with the Joker, like Joker brings it out, and that's when kind of Batman starts to like freak out and kind of back away, and like kind of see Joker calls it that Batman thinks Riddler's right, because the Joker is smart, right? He's just as smart as Batman, if not smarter. And I liked how that scene, in that one scene, we kind of got like what their little relationship.
Yeah, it was really clever, and it's so much thought put into it. The other scene we had, which was new, I'll break it down real quickly before we get reactions, but it was an iceberg lounge scene where it comes in the film ahead of Selina going down into the 44 below with the contact lenses and scoping out, the players downstairs for Batman. And so it's how she gets down there, basically. So she goes to the Penguin and she asks to work downstairs, and he tells her no, he doesn't want her downstairs because it's dangerous. but Selena says, well, she wants the money, and so she wants to work there, but Penguin is so obstinate against this idea that he offers to give her money, which she refuses, and then Penguin gets kind of sad and rejected, and asks if he's not good enough for her, and then in the turn of a dime, he also like low-key issues a threat that Carmine Falcone won't be around forever, and that one day the city is going to be his. What'd you guys think of that scene?
I thought it was great. I can understand why they cut it, because this happens a little bit too early in the film to kind of have you have any sort of sympathy towards Penguin. But it does do a great job of setting it up. Is like he knows that he's just biding his time until Falcone is gone, and then he's going to make his move. It does show his compassionate side too, where he's like trying to get her to not go down there and things like that, and that's great. It's interesting because going into this scene, I thought it was going to be more focused on Catwoman, and honestly, coming out of it, it really just feels like it's doing something for the Penguin. I agree with the fact that they cut it, but at the same time, it's nice to see that they had some ideas of how to make the Penguin a little bit a little bit softer before before everything else that went down. But it makes so much more sense to not have him be soft before like the giant car chase in that.
The final shot was really good, whereas it was Batman looking at through his little computer through the contact lens that Selena has, and it's just a close-up of Penguin saying how he's going to own this city one day. You just know that they're going to be they're going to be button heads for years to come.
Yeah, no, that was really cool, and I like that, in the commentary of the track, they mentioned that, of course, like this is where Penguin's showing some vulnerability, but since Selena knows Batman is watching, that's why she reacts the way she does, and like she may have softened the blow, were he not watching, is kind of the suggestion or hint they're getting at, and then obviously Penguin misinterprets her response as rejection, even though, that is not her intention necessarily. So I thought that was really cool and very complicated, and it does go back to the whole Fredo Corleone thing that Matt Reeves mentioned earlier in the Penguin section of the special features.
All right, and with that is all the special features. Definitely, if you haven't picked up the home video version, do it, because there's a lot of really good stuff here. One thing that I will find, I'll wrap this all up with, it was abundantly clear that Matt Reeves is enjoying every second of his time on this film. Robert Pattinson, the same thing. These, you can tell that they are like, there was something that I noticed, and I didn't have time to go back and watch some of this, watch a special feature, but I remember watching some special features for Batman Begins and maybe The Dark Knight with Chris Nolan talking about Batman, and like there was definitely a level of passion that Nolan had for those films, but Matt Reeves' passion is so much higher, and you can hear it in his voice whenever he's talking about the variety of different things, that whatever the topic is. We're trying to figure out this wingsuit. We were thinking about what to do with the Batmobile. This is what I was thinking for Catwoman. This is what I was thinking, when we were coming up with the ideas for Penguin. His passion for this project it reverberates across the entire crew, because the crew always gets really motivated by the director and things like that. And it's just really cool to see that. And I can see, as long as he has plenty of things to say, he's going to stay in this universe, and he's going to continue to say them, and it explains why he's producing, or he's going to be a producer on the potential other spin-off shows outside of the Penguin and this other one that's going to be doing Arkham or GCPD or whatever it ends up being. It explains why he also is attached to the animated Batman series that they're currently making, because even outside of his own stuff that he's doing, he's truly a fan of the character, and that's why he wants to be involved with this stuff. So it's great to see that. All right, so with all of that, that is going to wrap up this episode of the TBU podcast. If you guys are looking for a way to purchase this, be sure to use our affiliate link in the description because that does help the podcast as well as the website out. Outside of that, you can head over to our website, thebatmanuniverse.net, for all kinds of news, original content, other podcasts related to the movies, television, video games, merchandise, comics, and everything else in the Bat fandom. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Discord. We're all over the place. All of our social links can be found at the top of the page over at thebatmanuniverse.net. If you have something you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, be sure to leave a comment wherever you are listening to this, or you can send us an email at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net with any not only comments but also things that suggestions for future episodes as well. In addition to that, if you are interested in supporting us in other ways, whether it be monetarily or supporting us specifically, like if you want to become a patron on our Patreon, you can get actual early unedited versions of these podcasts right after we record them before they release to the public. That is one of the perks on Patreon. Outside of that, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Again, for BJ, Scott, and myself, thank you so much for listening to the TBU podcast, and we will see you guys next time.